This is going to be a debut for the Vice President and also the security team of the new administration. Much expectation from a seasoned diplomat like you?
So I think this is a first opportunity for the Trump administration to present a coherent and sophisticated approach to foreign policy. What we've heard thus far are tweets and shorthand coming out of Washington. But here in Germany already we had Secretary Tillerson at the G20 meeting. And here in Munich we're going to have Secretary of Defense Mattis, Vice President Pence, Secretary of Homeland Security John Kelly. And I think what we're going to hear is a lot of reassurance. A lot of commitment to NATO, a lot of commitment to some traditional tenets of U.S. foreign policy, and also some demands that our European allies spend more on defense, so it is not just the United States, and that we work together more aggressively, including with NATO, to tackle terrorism, which is a high priority for the incoming administration.
Right.
But I hope that combined message over this weekend will provide some reassurance.
Well, some reassurance. Ambassador Stanzel, as a seasoned diplomat yourself, how much do you think the Europeans are realistically expecting at this point from the new administration in the U.S., given the rhetorics earlier?
Yes, well, I think my friend and former colleague Kurt Volker has presented us a more coherent picture than presumably we will hear from the Secretary of Defense and from the Vice President.
But you know, Ambassador Volker does not serve the administration anymore. So
we have not seen any Yes, that's why I can say that. Against the backdrop from what we have seen from DC so far, I think it would be asking too much from the Vice President to present a coherent picture. What we're getting is incoherence. So I think two things are important in Munich. One is that people get to know each other. Secretary of Defense needs to meet a lot of colleagues from Europe, and the same is true for the Vice President necessarily, and to carry back the message. And secondly, and that's even more important, I hope that is a platform for the Europeans and non-Europeans, non-Americans, to express their concern at the uncertainty about where America actually is going. This, I think, would be crucial.
Mr. Teng, of course, we are observing this from afar. For the Munich conference, Chinese side is not going there, but for the G20 informal meeting of the foreign ministers, the Chinese foreign minister Wang Yi is there. But there are several issues here. The U.S. relations with the NATO, U.S. relations with EU, whether U.S. is going to approach or follow the so-called isolationist as a result of so-called America First, America First, and America First. So, as a Chinese scholar from this part of the world, what is going to be a successful conference for you?
Actually, this is a very important occasion for the Chinese foreign minister to talk with the Secretary of State of the United States and with other foreign affairs leaders in the world, including German foreign minister and also UK foreign minister, and to talk about the common concern and also to talk about the approaches to deal with the current challenges, not only in security but also in international politics and also in anti-terrorism.
I mean, Mr. Teng, it sounds very abstract, what you just said. What is the common concern? I mean, what are the approaches that you think the Chinese side would like to...
We should first have a consensus on the issues we are facing now. What is the number one? What is number two?
Anti-terrorism. The priority. Let's prioritize.
Anti-terrorism might be the number one. In some other countries, it's not number one. So we should have a consensus on the issues we are facing now.
Ambassador Volker, it has a lot to do with, of course, what is the agenda of the Trump administration. But it also has a lot to do, Ambassador Volker, if I could be frank with you, that is whether Vice President Pence is really representing the opinions and also the approach of the Trump administration. We have heard, if I could be blunt here, that Mr. Pence if, according to the rhetoric coming from the White House, was not even informed about some of the interactions with the Russian counterpart by the administration's team. So how well informed is Vice President Pence? Can he really represent this administration? What he said, can people take his words? Ambassador Volker, I have a lot of questions. I'm sorry, but those are important questions. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. I think that the answer to your question is yes, he can do that. The time period we're talking about with General Flynn speaking with the Russian ambassador in Washington was during the course of the transition. It was a very fluid time, and it was unclear exactly what the nature of those communications were. And I think he was embarrassed by it, and that's why he didn't properly inform Vice President Pence about the conversations. That is now behind us. Flynn is no longer National Security Advisor. Pence clearly comes out of this being in a strengthened position. And I think that as you go from the tweet sphere, whatever we call that, the president's tweeting every morning, to actual policy, it starts to look very different. We've had successful, very positive visits to the United States that have been well prepared from the Israeli Prime Minister, the Canadian Prime Minister, the Japanese Prime Minister. We've also now have General Mattis going to his first NATO meeting, giving a very, I think, strong message there of support for NATO, at the same time looking for NATO to do more. And I think that we're going to get a strong message from Pence as well. And as the administration, remember it's only 3 weeks, as the administration gets its feet on the ground, I think you're going to have an increasingly, and I will stand by it, a coherent message coming out of them about where they want to go.
Ambassador Stanzel, does the words coming from your colleague really comfort your heartbreaking at this point? May I ask you about this? What about the extent that you can take the words? I mean, at this point, you see a split of opinion coming from the president and coming from the White House spokesperson, coming from the secretaries, important secretaries, defense, state, and coming from the presidential office. Whose word do you think the Europeans understand to listen to?
Exactly the most important question that we ask ourselves. And let me take as an example the question you raised before, which is raising the defense expenditures by NATO member countries. Had in the past an American Secretary of Defense come to the NATO meeting and told his colleagues that either they raise their expenditures by the end of the year or the US would withdraw a lot of their support, nobody would have taken that serious. Now we have to take it serious because obviously it reflects to a large degree the thinking of the president. But has anybody told the president, not to speak of the Secretary of Defense, that the American security actually starts at the eastern border of Poland? It is a shared security against the backup from the United States. The whole European region helps America's defense. It's a shared security. That's the basis upon which NATO rests. So actually, increasing defense expenditures does make much sense. And it has started, as Kurt Volker knows very well, already a long time ago. And the reason is not because of blackmail from Washington, D.C., it is because of Russian aggressiveness, which has forced us to work together in different ways to restructure the way we coordinate NATO's work, etc. This has been going on. So what is it actually that's coming from Washington? Has anybody thought about the basis of what NATO is? And
great point.
You will ask about the economy later on, but I would think say on the economic front, it is exactly the same.
Okay, Ambassador Stanzel, I heard your point.
So in order
to let your colleague to respond to that, we have to let people all talk. So Ambassador Volker, you want to respond to that? That we are not here to judge what is exactly the Russian approach, but rather how the US and the European counterparts, particularly within NATO, should work together. Whose cause is it?
Right. Well, I want to agree with a couple things that Ambassador Stanzel said. One, NATO security is an American interest. It's not just uniquely American security, but broader all the way through Poland and the Baltic states. And second, the reason that these countries are increasing defense expenditure is indeed Russian aggression. No question about that. But I would add a couple more things. General Mattis knows NATO very, very well. He served as a four-star general in a NATO command as the commander of Allied transformation. I think also that Vice President Pence, through his time in Congress, also had a good deal of exposure to NATO. So I think this is understood. But this point about sharing the burden is something that goes back through many, many administrations. Yeah. I remember back in the Reagan and the Bush administrations in the 80s, we were talking about European defense spending. Secretary Bob Gates, under President Obama, warned in 2012 that if NATO allies did not increase defense spending, that we would see the United States increasingly concerned and not able to sustain our support for that politically. And that's really where we've come to. So I think it is time that we actually see some change.
Well, Ambassador Stanzel, while you are sipping your tea, may I also ask a question to you? I mean, if NATO asking so much money coming from the European counterparts, the US asks you guys to pay, why not, some would suggest among the European countries, develop your own strategy of security and defense with the structure, for example, of the European Union, some would argue. What do you think these different mix of thoughts going on right now? Ambassador Stanzel.
Yes, well, yes, you're right. This is a complex picture. First of all, NATO cannot work without the last resort, which is nuclear deterrence. And while France and Great Britain have nuclear forces, they're minimal as compared to that of the United States. We need, as a defense of last resort, the United States, if only in that respect. On the other hand, obviously, with the situation in Central Europe changing rapidly due to Russia's aggressiveness, as I said, indeed, cooperation between European countries has progressed to an enormous degree, so that now, very much under collective leadership, several European countries join their brigades and forces together. It has not yet come to a kind of European force of its own for the reason that I just gave. We need the United States for that. But indeed, in adapting to the changing situation, this is actually what is going on.
Well, Mr. Teng, you've been attentive to listen to your two counterparts coming from from the U.S. and also the European country, Germany. What about China? I mean, Chinese foreign minister is there to meet his counterparts, but we also understand Secretary of State, Mr. Tillerson, has been very quiet. According to his aides, his aim there, quote, is to listen. Yeah. We even understand, Mr. Teng, when he was meeting with the Russian counterpart, Mr. Lavrov, he only asked Mr. Lavrov to make a very brief statement within a few seconds. After statement is being made, the American aide of Secretary of State ushered everybody out of the room with the Russian counterpart asking, why? Why would you let them go? We still want to talk to the press. So, Mr. Teng, really, how much real discussion can take place here?
I mean, between China and the United States?
For example, the Chinese foreign minister and his many, for example, American counterparts.
Yeah, I think our minister is a shining star everywhere. But this time, since China, for the first time to attend such a big, important conference in Germany, and one task, to my understanding, is to give the preparation for the summit between Chinese leader and the United leader. This is a very important job for him. So everybody would like to ask him, what will China and the United States cooperate and in the future, and how and when about the summit between the two countries. Yeah. So this is a very important, interesting topic, because everybody today, after the inauguration of Donald Trump 1 month ago, they would like to talk about the relations between China and the United States. So this is a very important preparation for the coming summit between China and the United States.
And of course, Ambassador Volker, I have to go to you about this. China demonstrated great degree of patience after the new administration came into power in terms of the U.S.-China relations. Recently, we see some interactions, but where do you think Secretary Tillerson and also Vice President Pence is likely to lead the direction of the bilateral relations, at least for this occasion?
Well, I think it's, to me, fairly straightforward. There are areas where we're going to have some disagreements with China that we need to talk about. South China Sea is one of those. Some economic issues are one of those as well. And at the same time, there are tremendously important issues where the U.S. and China need to be working together, and we need to build a more effective partnership. And I think that both of those two gentlemen you mentioned, the Vice President and Secretary Tillerson, are the kind of people who see that balance very, very clearly and are ready to work with Chinese counterparts, both to manage the difficult issues and try to invest in some necessary strategic issues where we can. Now, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to change overnight. I think China understands that. China has its own views on these things. So I think a bit of patience and a little bit of getting the dialogue going, getting to know each other, as Ambassador Stanzel said earlier about the new administration. I do think that that is a key part of what's happening now. And we did have a very good phone call between President Trump and President Xi, and I think that is setting up the prospect of a future meeting that hopefully will be constructive.
Mr. Teng, final words from you. Of course, it takes the new administration some time to come up with a policy.
Yeah.
But while China is patient enough to have the new administration go through its learning curve, there's another possibility that they are planning something specifically big and strategic. Could be for the relation, could be against a good relationship.
Yeah, this is a dual-track policy by the U.S. government. No matter, it's still under its transition from President Obama to President Donald Trump. But I think the main direction, as we have witnessed in recent weeks, we can positively say this is actually a continuation of the good relation or stable relation between China and the United States. Even the policy is not there today.
Wow, you are very confident, obviously,
very
Mr.
Teng.
Yeah. I hope I could have your confidence as a press person. Before we go, also final word from you, Ambassador Stanzel.
If you mean about the
Yes.
Chinese-American relationship,
Sure.
I mean, this is a major relationship today. Otherwise, the phone call would not have taken place against the backdrop of what President Trump had said earlier on. So it shows in Washington people are aware of the importance of that relationship. I think in China too. For us Europeans, however, the problem is with both Beijing and Washington, the question, how much committed are both governments to the liberal world order, which has benefited both countries enormously. But of course, we see with both countries, and especially with the new administration in Washington, but in Beijing too, a kind of selective approach to the international rules-based order. So I think something like this meeting in Bonn that you alluded to, the G20 foreign ministerial meeting, has been a good forum to make these concerns clear to the two superpowers.